The morning sun broke over Naval Amphibious Base Coronado at 0545 hours, casting long shadows across the grinder where 12 SEAL candidates stood in formation. The Pacific Ocean provided its usual soundtrack, waves crashing against the beach in rhythmic percussion that had witnessed thousands of warriors earn their tridents over decades of unforgiving training. The smell of salt air, mixed with the rubber from dive fins and the faint trace of gear oil that seemed permanently embedded in the concrete. Staff Sergeant Maya Reeves stepped out of a gray sedan in the visitor parking lot. Her movements economical and precise. She wore simple civilian clothes, faded jeans, a plain black t-shirt, and worn running shoes that had seen better days. Her dark hair was pulled back in a functional ponytail, and she carried a single military duffel bag over her shoulder with the kind of ease that suggested it weighed nothing, though the way the fabric stretched indicated otherwise. Nothing about her screamed military. Nothing about her demanded attention. She looked like any contractor or administrative personnel arriving for another day of supporting the training pipeline. Which was exactly the point. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe to Military and Veteran Stories so you never miss these true tales of courage. And tell us in the comments, where are you watching from today? Maya paused at the security checkpoint, presenting her common access card to the guard. He barely glanced at it before waving her through, just another face in the constant flow of support personnel that kept the SEAL training machine running. But if he'd looked closer, if he'd actually read the designation codes on that card, he might have noticed details that didn't match her civilian appearance. She didn't correct him. She simply nodded her thanks and walked toward the training compound with the kind of bearing that most people wouldn't recognize, but that trained operators spotted instantly. Her feet found the quietest path across the gravel. Her eyes tracked movement in her peripheral vision without obvious head turns. When she passed two instructors engaged in conversation, she gave them space automatically, the ingrained habit of someone who understood personal security zones. The training facility hummed with pre-dawn activity. Candidates were conducting equipment checks, preparing for another day of evolutions designed to test their physical limits and mental resilience. This particular group, Class 342, had just completed Hell Week 3 days ago. They'd survived the crucible that eliminated more than 60% of candidates, and they wore that accomplishment like invisible armor. Especially these 12. Petty Officer 2nd Class Derek Kane stood at the center of his group like a pack leader among wolves. At 24, he was tall, broad-shouldered, and carried himself with the particular brand of confidence that came from surviving the hardest military training on Earth. His Bud S-Class had started with 182 candidates. Only 43 remained. He was the honor man, the top performer who'd led every run, crushed every evolution, and never once rung the bell to quit. "Check it out," Kane said, nodding toward Maya as she walked past their formation. "Another contractor here to hold our hands through dive phase." His 11 teammates chuckled, the sound carrying across the grinder with the easy camaraderie of men who'd suffered together and emerged stronger. They ranged in age from 22 to 27, each one a physical specimen who'd proven themselves capable of enduring punishment that would break ordinary people. Seaman Jake Morrison, Kane's closest friend in the class, grinned. "Think she's here to teach us about feelings? Maybe discuss our emotional response to cold water?" More laughter. It wasn't particularly cruel, yet just the kind of casual dismissal that young warriors often directed toward anyone they perceived as outside their brotherhood. They'd earned their place here through blood, sweat, and more pain than most people experienced in a lifetime. Everyone else was just support personnel. Maya heard the comments but didn't react. Her expression remained neutral, her pace unchanged. She'd heard worse, much worse, in places where the stakes were higher than hurt feelings. She continued toward the administrative building where she was supposed to check in with the training coordinator. The building sat adjacent to the main training compound, giving her a clear view of the grinder where candidates conducted their daily evolutions. As she walked, her eyes automatically cataloged details that most visitors wouldn't notice. The obstacle course had been recently modified, new rope placements on the cargo net, fresh sand under the log PT area. The dive tower showed signs of maintenance work. 3 instructors were gathered near the equipment shed, their body language suggesting they were discussing the day's training schedule. One of them kept glancing at a clipboard, while the others nodded. These weren't conscious observations. They were automatic threat assessments, ingrained through years of training in environments where missing details could get people killed. But here, in the relative safety of a training facility, they were just background noise in her awareness. "Excuse me, ma'am?" A voice called from behind her. Maya turned to find one of Kane's group jogging to catch up with her. Petty Officer 3rd Class Marcus Chen, according to the name tape on his uniform. He was younger than Kane, perhaps 23, with an earnest expression that suggested he actually wanted to be helpful rather than dismissive. "Yes?" Maya's voice was calm, professional, with a slight rasp that came from years of salt water and dust storms. "You look a bit lost," Chen said. "Can I help you find something?" It was politely offered, but Maya caught the underlying assumption that she needed help because she obviously didn't belong here. To be fair, she'd cultivated that exact impression. "I'm checking in with Lieutenant Commander Briggs. Administrative building, 2nd floor. Chen nodded. "That's just ahead. Can't miss it." He hesitated, then added, "You here for the dive phase support contract?" "Something like that," Maya replied, offering nothing more. "Well, welcome to Coronado. It's intense, but the instructors know what they're doing." He said it with the pride of someone who'd survived their crucible and now felt qualified to explain the process to outsiders. "I'm sure they do." Maya's tone remained neutral, but something in her eyes, a brief flash of knowledge that suggested she knew exactly how intense this training could be made. Chen paused. For just a moment, he looked at her more carefully. Noticed the way she stood with her weight evenly distributed, ready to move in any direction. Noticed the calluses on her hands that weren't from typing or filing paperwork. Noticed something in her bearing that didn't quite match the contractor image. But then Kane's voice cut across the distance. "Chen, stop flirting and get back here. We've got gear inspection in 5. The moment broke. Chen offered an apologetic smile and jogged back to his group, leaving Maya to continue toward the administrative building alone. Lieutenant Commander Briggs was a weathered SEAL with 22 years of service and the kind of face that had seen too many deployments to count. His office was sparse American flag in the corner. Photos of teams past. A single shelf of military manuals. He looked up when Maya entered, and unlike the security guard or the candidates on the grinder, his eyes sharpened with immediate recognition. "Staff Sergeant Reeves," he said, standing to shake her hand. His grip was firm, professional. "Welcome to Coronado. Your orders came through this morning." "Thank you, sir." Maya's entire bearing shifted subtly in the presence of someone who knew exactly who she was. The civilian contractor facade remained, but something in her posture straightened. Briggs gestured for her to sit, then closed the door. When he spoke again, his voice was lower, more careful. "I've got to say, when they told me you'd be coming here to observe training protocols, I wasn't expecting them to send someone with your background. Is that going to be a problem, sir?" "Problem? No." Briggs leaned back in his chair, studying her. "But I am curious why someone who's been downrange more times than most of my instructors is here pretending to be administrative support." Maya had expected this question. "Sir, my orders are to conduct an assessment of current training methodologies with an eye toward integration protocols for future candidates. The brass wants someone with operational experience to evaluate whether the pipeline is preparing operators for the realities they'll face in theater. And they want you to do it quietly, without the plight possible of sometime candidates knowing you're evaluating them." "That's correct, sir." Briggs nodded slowly. "I understand the logic, but you should know these candidates, especially the ones who just finished Hell Week. They're cocky as hell right now. They think they've proven everything they need to prove. If they figure out you're here to assess them, they might not take it well." "I can handle myself, sir. I don't doubt that for a second." "Staff Sergeant." Briggs pulled out a folder and slid it across the desk. Here's the training schedule for the next 2 weeks. Dive phase starts tomorrow. But today they're conducting land warfare refreshers and small unit tactics. You'll have access to all facilities and all evolutions. The instructors have been briefed that you're here for contractor liaison work. They don't know your actual assignment. Maya opened the folder, scanning the detailed schedule with the practiced eye of someone who'd planned and executed operations far more complex than training evolutions. What about Class 342 specifically? Any concerns I should be aware of? They're good candidates. Strong performers across the board. But, Briggs hesitated, choosing his words carefully. There's a core group of about 12 who formed a tight unit. Led by Petty Officer Kane, he's the honor man. They're physically exceptional, but they've developed what I'd call an inflated sense of their own capabilities. Nothing that won't get corrected through experience, but it makes them dismissive of anyone they perceive as outsiders. I've noticed. You've been here 20 minutes. They were commenting on my arrival when I walked past the grinder. Briggs smiled without humor. That's the group. They mean well. Mostly. They're just young and convinced they've already figured everything out because they survived Hell Week. They'll learn. They will. Maya agreed, though her tone suggested the learning process might be more dramatic than Briggs anticipated. The lieutenant commander stood, signaling the meeting's end. Your credentials will get you access anywhere on base. If you need anything, my door is open. And Staff Sergeant? Try not to break too many of my candidates during your assessment. Maya's expression remained neutral. I'm just here to observe, sir. Right. Observe. Briggs walked her to the door, then added quietly, for what it's worth, I'm glad they sent you. These kids need to understand that being a SEAL isn't just about surviving training. It's about what comes after. What you've seen, what you've done, that's the reality they need to be prepared for. After Maya left his office, she spent the next hour familiarizing herself with the facility layout. The training compound was organized with military precision, distinct areas for different evolution types, clear sight lines for instructor supervision, and emergency equipment positioned at strategic intervals. It was a well-oiled machine designed to transform civilians into special operators. She noted the modifications since her last visit years ago. New dive facilities, updated obstacle course, enhanced combat training areas. The Navy had invested heavily in SEAL training infrastructure, and it showed. At 0800 hours, Class 342, assembled on the grinder for morning briefing. Maya positioned herself near the equipment shed, close enough to observe but far enough to avoid drawing attention. She pulled out a tablet and began taking notes, playing her role as contractor liaison documenting training procedures. Senior Chief Petty Officer Hammond, the lead instructor for dive phase, addressed the candidates with the gravitas of someone who'd trained hundreds of SEALs over 2 decades. His voice carried across the grinder without needing to shout. Gentlemen, congratulations on completing Hell Week. You've proven you can suffer. Now we're going to prove whether you can think. The candidates stood at attention, but Maya could see the pride in their postures. They'd survived the impossible. They were bulletproof. Dive phase, Hammond continued, will test your ability to remain calm when every instinct screams panic. You will learn to trust your equipment, trust your swim buddy, and trust your training when you're 60 feet down with darkness above and below. Some of you will not pass this phase. Accept that now. Kane's group stood together in formation, their body language suggesting they didn't believe Hammond's warning applied to them. They'd already conquered Hell Week. Dive phase would be just another challenge to crush. Before we begin underwater evolutions tomorrow, we're conducting land warfare refreshers today. Small unit tactics, patrol formations, and immediate action drills. You'll be divided into 3 teams of 14 candidates each. Team leaders will be Kane, Rodriguez, and Mitchell. Maya made notes on her tablet, but her eyes never stopped moving. She watched how candidates responded to Hammond's instructions. noted who showed genuine attention versus who was merely going through motions, cataloged the group dynamics that were already forming. Kane's 12-man core group stood out immediately. They clustered together with the unconscious cohesion of people who'd bonded through shared suffering. They were the strongest swimmers, the fastest runners, the top performers in physical evolutions. And they knew it. The morning's training exercises were conducted on the beach and in the nearby training areas. Maya followed at a distance, maintaining her contractor cover while observing how candidates executed basic tactical movements. Most of it was competent, but unrefined, exactly what you'd expect from people who'd focused primarily on physical endurance rather than combat skills. But Kane's group performed noticeably better than average. They moved with coordination, communicated efficiently, and demonstrated tactical awareness that exceeded their actual experience level. They were natural athletes translating physical prowess into tactical competence. It was impressive. It was also dangerous, because it reinforced their belief that they already understood what being a SEAL meant. During a water break around 1030 hours, Maya approached the equipment area to refill her own water bottle. Kane's group was gathered nearby, discussing their performance in voices just loud enough to be overheard. That patrol formation exercise was basic-level stuff, Morrison said, gulping water. I was running more complex movements in Marine Recon training before I transferred to BUD. For real, agreed Petty Officer James Wilson, another member of the Core 12. When do we get to the actual SEAL shit? The raids, the direct action, the high-value target stuff. Kane, to his credit, was slightly more measured. Patience, brothers. They're building foundation skills. Once we get through dive phase and move to advanced training, that's when it gets real. Maya filled her water bottle slowly. Her face turned away but her ears tracking every word. I just hope they assign us to teams that actually deploy, Morrison continued. I didn't survive Hell Week to sit stateside doing training exercises. I want combat deployments. Real missions. You and me both. Wilson agreed. I want to be kicking doors in hostile territory, taking down bad guys, doing the work that actually matters. Their enthusiasm was genuine, their commitment real. They wanted to serve, wanted to test themselves in combat, wanted to make a difference. Maya understood that desire intimately. She'd felt it herself once. Before deployment after deployment had taught her the difference between wanting combat and living with its consequences. One of the younger members of the group, Seaman Recruit Tyler Brooks, fresh-faced and eager, noticed Maya nearby. Hey, contractor lady, you getting all this documented for your reports? It wasn't hostile, just casually dismissive. She was part of the scenery, present but not really relevant to their world. Maya turned, her expression neutral. Just staying hydrated. Same as you. Right, right. Brooks nodded, already losing interest. Must be nice though, getting to observe all this without actually having to do it. Watching us suffer while you stay comfortable. Several of the others chuckled. It was casual locker room banter. Not malicious, but definitely condescending. They genuinely didn't think she could comprehend what they were experiencing. Everyone suffers differently. Maya replied quietly, then walked away before they could continue the conversation. Kane watched her go, something flickering across his expression too quickly for his teammates to catch. Unlike the others, he'd noticed details they'd missed. The way she moved with absolute economy of motion. The fact that her worn running shoes were actually high-end trail runners designed for rough terrain. The small scar on her left forearm that looked like it came from something sharp, moving fast. But he said nothing. The moment passed, and his attention returned to his team. The afternoon brought more intensive training combat scenarios designed to test decision-making under stress. Hammond had set up a mock village in the training area, complete with structures that approximated the buildings American forces encountered in Middle Eastern deployments. Scenario, Hammond announced to the assembled candidates. Your team is conducting a patrol when you take contact from an unknown number of hostiles, using a two-story building as a firing position. Demonstrate your immediate action drill and clearance procedure. You have 10 minutes to plan. Then we execute. Kane's team drew the first evolution. They gathered in a tight huddle, discussing tactics with the intensity of people who'd studied these scenarios extensively during their pre-Bud S preparation. Maya positioned herself in the observation area alongside several SEAL instructors who would evaluate the candidates' performance. She recognized two of them, Senior Chief Martinez and Chief Petty Officer Jackson, though they didn't recognize her. She'd changed considerably since her own time in training, and her current civilian appearance was designed to avoid triggering recognition. "What do you think?" Martinez asked Jackson, watching the candidates plan their approach. "Kane's group has the physical tools, but tactical thinking is different from running fast." "We'll see," Jackson replied. "Sometimes, the strongest candidates are the ones who struggle most with thinking instead of just executing." Maya said nothing, but she watched with the practiced eye of someone who'd executed more building clearances than these candidates had done push-ups. When Kane's team moved to execute their plan, they performed competently. They established a security perimeter, identified the most likely enemy positions, and coordinated a multi-element approach to the building. Their movement was clean, their communication adequate, and their overall execution would have earned passing marks in any training scenario. But Maya noticed the flaws immediately. They stacked on the wrong side of the door, exposing themselves to potential fire from windows they hadn't properly cleared. Their entry timing was slightly off, creating a gap where the point man would be vulnerable. They failed to establish rear security, leaving their 6 o'clock completely open to potential flanking maneuvers. These weren't fatal errors in a training environment. In combat, any one of them could have gotten people killed. The instructors noticed some of the issues, calling them out during the after-action review. But they were teaching, not criticizing. This was the learning process, making mistakes in training so you didn't make them when lives depended on perfection. Kane accepted the feedback professionally, but Maya could see the frustration beneath his composed exterior. He was used to excelling, used to being the top performer. Having his tactical execution critiqued clearly bothered him more than physical challenges ever did. During the next team's execution, Maya moved closer to the observation area where several instructors were discussing the morning's performance. "Class 342 is strong overall," Martinez was saying. "Physical capabilities are exceptional across the board. But they're still thinking like athletes instead of operators." "That comes with time," another instructor replied. "Once they hit advanced training and start working with teams that have actual deployment experience, they'll understand the difference." Maya considered interjecting, offering insights from her operational experience. But that would have violated her cover and defeated the purpose of her assessment. So she remained silent, taking notes on her tablet while tracking the conversation. The afternoon progressed through multiple iterations of the clearance drill. Each team executed, received feedback, and planned improvements for subsequent runs. It was solid training methodology, exactly what you'd expect from one of the world's premier special operations training pipelines. But something was nagging at Maya. The candidates, particularly Kane's core group, were learning the mechanics of tactical movement without understanding the why behind them. They followed procedures because instructors told them to, not because they'd internalized the life and death importance of proper execution. She'd seen this before. Candidates who were technically proficient but lacked the combat mindset that separated operators from students. Usually that mindset came from deployment experience, from missions where mistakes had consequences beyond failed evolutions. As the day's training concluded around 1,630 hours, Maya found herself standing near the equipment shed, watching candidates conduct post-exercise maintenance on their gear. It was a fundamental part of SEAL culture: take care of your equipment because your equipment takes care of you. Kane's group worked together, their movements practiced and efficient. They joked while they worked, the easy camaraderie of brothers in arms who'd proven themselves together. "Hey, contractor lady," Morrison called out, noticing Maya nearby. "You get enough material for your reports? Lots of exciting equipment maintenance to document." His tone was friendly but patronizing. He genuinely didn't understand that someone who didn't wear the uniform couldn't comprehend their world. Maya looked up from her tablet. "It's all useful information, I bet." Morrison grinned. "Must be pretty boring compared to whatever desk job you normally do. Following us around, watching us train, taking notes about stuff you'll never actually experience." Several of his teammates chuckled. It wasn't cruel, they didn't intend to hurt her feelings. They simply operated from the assumption that she existed in a completely different reality than theirs. One where real warriors did the hard work while support personnel documented it from a safe distance. "Everyone contributes in their own way," Maya replied evenly. "True that," Kane interjected, his voice carrying more authority than Morrison's. "No disrespect intended, ma'am. We just get focused on our own world sometimes." Tunnel vision. It was more thoughtful than Morrison's casual dismissal, and Maya recognized the leadership quality that had made Kane the honor man. He understood optics better than his teammates, knew when to moderate their behavior even if he shared their underlying assumptions. "No offense taken," Maya assured them. "You've all worked hard today. You should be proud of what you accomplished." "Appreciate that," Kane said, then turned back to his team. "All right, brothers, finish up here and we'll hit the chow hall. Dive phase starts at 0600 tomorrow. And I want everyone rested and ready." As they dispersed, Maya noticed Chief Jackson watching her with an expression of curiosity. He approached after the candidates had moved out of earshot. "You seem pretty interested in this class," Jackson observed. "Most contractors who come through here are just checking boxes for compliance reports. But you're actually watching them like you're evaluating their performance." Maya chose her words carefully. "I find the training methodology fascinating. The attention to detail, the way you build skills progressively." "Uh-huh." Jackson didn't sound entirely convinced. "You ever work with special operations before this assignment?" "I've been around military training in various capacities." It was deliberately vague, and Jackson picked up on that immediately. But before he could press further, Senior Chief Hammond called him over to discuss the next day's dive schedule. Maya used the interruption to make her exit, walking back toward the administrative building as the sun began its descent toward the Pacific horizon. The day had confirmed what she'd suspected from her initial observations. Class 342 was physically capable but still learning to think like operators rather than athletes. And Kane's core group, for all their exceptional performance, had developed blind spots that came from too much early success. They'd been the strongest, fastest, and most determined candidates in their class. That success had convinced them they already understood what it meant to be a SEAL. Tomorrow would be interesting. Dive phase had a way of humbling even the most confident candidates. Underwater, strength mattered less than calm problem solving. Physical prowess couldn't compensate for panic when equipment malfunctioned at depth. Maya had survived dive phase twice, once during her initial SEAL training before women were officially integrated into the program, and again during specialized clearance diver training that went far beyond basic SEAL qualifications. She knew exactly how crushing that water could be, how darkness and pressure could turn the ocean into a malevolent entity that tested your will to survive. She wondered how Kane and his group would respond when they faced that test. Would they adapt, demonstrating the mental flexibility that combat operations required? Or would their confidence become a liability, making them resistant to instruction because they believed they already knew everything they needed to know? The answer would reveal itself soon enough. As she reached her temporary quarters on base, Maya's secure phone buzzed with an encrypted message from her command. She unlocked it with biometric verification, revealing a simple text. Assessment timeline accelerated. Need preliminary report within 48 hours. Integration protocols under review, at highest levels. Your evaluation will inform final decision on pipeline modifications. Maya read the message twice, then deleted it per protocol. The stakes were higher than she'd initially understood. Her assessment wasn't just academic, it would directly impact how the Navy prepared future SEAL candidates, particularly as the service moved toward full gender integration in special operations roles. She thought about Kane and his 12 teammates, They represented the best of what the current pipeline produced: physically exceptional, mentally tough, committed to service. But they also represented the pipeline's limitations, the gaps between training, proficiency, and operational reality. Tomorrow, she'd begin testing those limitations more directly. It was time to stop merely observing. The Pacific Ocean at 0530 hours was dark, cold, and utterly indifferent to human ambition. Maya stood on the beach watching the first hints of dawn paint the eastern sky in shades of deep purple and orange. The water temperature was 58 degrees Fahrenheit, cold enough to sap strength and cloud judgment if you weren't prepared for it. Class 342 assembled on the grinder in their dive gear, faces showing the nervous anticipation that came before their first full dive evolution. They'd done pool work, practiced equipment checks, and completed shallow water exercises. But today marked their first deep dive in open ocean 60 feet down in visibility that could drop to near zero depending on conditions. Senior Chief Hammond stood before them like a monument to SEAL training tradition. Behind him, 3 instructor divers made final preparations on the dive boat, checking equipment with the methodical precision of people who understood that underwater, mistakes killed. "Gentlemen," Hammond began, his voice carrying over the sound of surf. "Today you learn whether you can think when your brain is screaming at you to panic. Pool work is controlled. Ocean diving is chaos. Currents, cold, darkness, equipment malfunctions, all of it conspires to make you quit. Your job is to stay calm and solve problems." Maya watched from her position near the equipment staging area, tablet in hand but eyes tracking every detail. She'd positioned herself deliberately, close enough to observe but not so close that she'd draw attention during the briefing. Kane's group stood together as always, their wetsuits already on, hoods pushed back to reveal faces that showed confidence bordering on arrogance. They'd studied dive theory extensively, practiced procedures until they could execute them blindfolded, and convinced themselves that mental preparation equaled actual experience. Maya knew better. The ocean didn't care about your GPA in dive physics. "Before we get in the water," Hammond continued, "we're going to conduct equipment inspections. Your dive buddy's life depends on your gear functioning perfectly, and vice versa. I want every regulator tested, every valve verified, every connection checked twice." The candidates moved to their gear stations, beginning the ritual of pre-dive inspection with varying degrees of thoroughness. Kane's group worked efficiently, their movements practiced from weeks of pool training. But Maya noticed small details that made her frown. Morrison was rushing his regulator check, going through motions without actually testing pressure differentials. Wilson had connected his BC inflator hose at a slight angle that would work fine on the surface, but might leak at depth. Brooks hadn't properly secured his weight belt, leaving the quick-release mechanism partially exposed where it could snag on equipment. These weren't catastrophic errors. They were the kind of small mistakes that accumulated over time, creating vulnerabilities that revealed themselves when conditions deteriorated. The instructors caught some issues, correcting them with sharp efficiency, but they couldn't catch everything, and that was part of the learning process. Some lessons only stuck when candidates experienced the consequences firsthand in controlled environments. As the inspection continued, Maya noticed Chief Jackson approaching her position. He carried 2 sets of dive gear, one his own instructor rig, the other a standard candidate setup. "Morning," Jackson said casually. "Lieutenant Commander Briggs asked me to check if you wanted to observe from the dive boat or from shore." It was a simple question, but Maya heard the undertone. Jackson was probing, trying to understand why a contractor would be given the option to accompany a dive evolution. "What would give me better perspective on the training methodology?" Maya asked, deflecting with her cover story. Jackson studied her for a moment. "Boat gives you close observation of how candidates handle pre-dive stress and post-dive debriefs. But you'd be limited to watching surface intervals." He paused. "Unless you're dive qualified, in which case you could observe underwater procedures directly." The conversation had shifted from casual inquiry to something more pointed. Jackson had noticed details about Maya over the previous day: her movement patterns, her observational focus, The way she evaluated tactical exercises with more sophistication than a typical contractor would possess. I have some dive experience, Maya admitted carefully. Open water certification, advanced rescue diver, nitrox qualified. It was all technically true, though it omitted the part where she'd also completed SEAL dive phase, combat clearance diver school, and approximately 200 operational dives in conditions ranging from tropical waters to under-ice Arctic environments. Jackson's eyebrows rose slightly. That's more than some experience. Most contractors can't tell a regulator from a BC inflator. He gestured to the spare gear he'd brought. If you're qualified and willing, you could dive with the instructor team. Give you first-hand observation of how candidates perform at depth. Maya pretended to consider the offer, though she'd been hoping for exactly this opportunity. I wouldn't want to interfere with the training evolution. You won't. We always have extra safety divers for play. First ocean dives. You'd just be one more set of eyes watching for problems. Jackson's expression suggested he was testing her, curious to see if she'd accept. Then yes, I'd appreciate the opportunity. Great. Gear up, and we'll do a buddy check before we board the boat. 20 minutes later, Maya sat on the dive boat in full gear. Her equipment configured with the unconscious precision of someone who'd done this thousands of times. She'd deliberately chosen slightly older gear from the equipment pool. Nothing that would stand out, but she'd assembled it with efficiency that would have impressed any dive instructor. Jackson had noticed. During their buddy check, he'd watched her go through procedures with the smooth economy of motion that only came from extensive experience. She'd caught his evaluating gaze but maintained her contractor cover, asking occasional questions that suggested competence without revealing expertise. The boat headed out as sunrise broke fully over the horizon, painting the ocean in shades of gold and blue. Class 342 sat in two lines along the gunwales, checking and rechecking their equipment with the nervous energy of people about to test themselves in an alien environment. Kane's group maintained their usual confidence, but Maya noticed subtle signs of stress. Morrison's leg was bouncing rapidly. Wilson kept adjusting his mask unnecessarily. Even Kane showed tension in his shoulders that hadn't been there during land exercises. Good. Fear was healthy. It meant they understood the ocean demanded respect. Hammond stood at the bow, waiting until the boat reached the dive site before addressing the candidates. Listen up. First dive is straightforward 60 feet, 20 minutes, bottom time. Basic buddy skills and equipment recovery drills. You'll descend in pairs, conduct exercises with your instructor team, then surface together. Water temp is 58 degrees, visibility is approximately 30 feet. Current is running at 0.5 knots, southwest. He paused, letting the information sink in. If you have an equipment malfunction, signal your buddy and your instructor. We will bring you up safely. If you panic, if you lose control, if you cannot maintain situational awareness, you will be pulled from the dive, and we will reassess whether you continue in this program. The ocean does not care about your Hell Week performance. Understood? Hooyah, Senior Chief. The candidates responded in unison, though Maya heard varying degrees of conviction in their voices. First pair Kane and Morrison. You're with me. Kane and Morrison moved to the entry position, final checking their regulators and BCs. They looked at each other, exchanged a fist bump, then at Hammond's signal, stepped off the boat into the Pacific. Maya watched them disappear beneath the surface, bubbles marking their descent. Through the clear water, she could track their progress for the first 20 feet before they faded into the blue-green depths. Second pair, Wilson and Brooks. You're with Chief Jackson. The next pair entered, then the next. Maya waited with the other instructor divers, watching each team descend until it was just her and 3 remaining candidates on the boat. Staff Sergeant Reeves, one of the instructors, Senior Chief Martinez said formally, using her actual rank for the first time. You're with me. We'll observe the last group and provide backup safety coverage. So they knew. Or at least Martinez knew. Maya caught his eye and saw acknowledgement there. He'd been briefed on her real assignment, though probably not the full extent of her background. Roger that, Senior Chief. They entered the water together, the cold hitting Maya's exposed face like a physical slap. But her breathing remained steady, controlled, exactly the same rhythm she'd maintained through countless dives in waters far colder and more dangerous than this training evolution. The descent was smooth, pressure equalizing naturally as they dropped through the water column. Visibility was actually better than Hammond had indicated, closer to 40 feet, and Maya could see multiple dive teams below conducting their exercises. At 60 feet, the ocean took on the deep blue-green color that Maya had learned to love and respect in equal measure. Sound was muffled except for the rhythmic breathing of regulators and the occasional ping of the boat's hull transmitted through the water. Martinez pointed toward Kane and Morrison's position about 30 feet away. Even at this distance, Maya could see Morrison struggling with an equipment drill, his movements jerky and inefficient. Kane was trying to help, but showing frustration at his buddy's difficulty. Hammond swam closer to them, demonstrating the correct procedure with exaggerated slowness. Morrison tried again, improved slightly, but still showed signs of stress in his rapid breathing pattern. Maya monitored the situation while maintaining her own position in the water column. One of the fundamental skills SEALs had to master was staying calm at depth while solving problems. Morrison was learning that physical strength meant nothing down here, only mental control mattered. A flash of movement caught Maya's attention. Wilson, working with Jackson about 40 feet to her left, had dropped his diving knife during an equipment recovery drill. The knife was sinking slowly, catching the filtered sunlight as it tumbled into deeper water. Wilson started to dive after it, but Jackson grabbed his BC and held him in place. The instructor pointed emphatically at the depth gauge, then shook his head. The message was clear. The knife wasn't worth exceeding their planned depth limit. Good call. Objects weren't worth compromising dive safety. But Wilson clearly disagreed. Maya saw the frustration in his body language, the way he stared down at the disappearing knife like he'd lost something valuable rather than a replaceable piece of training equipment. The dive continued for another 15 minutes, each team completing their assigned drills with varying degrees of success. Kane performed well once Morrison settled down, demonstrating the leadership qualities that had made him honor man. Several other candidates showed impressive composure, solving problems methodically despite the alien environment. But Maya also noticed the patterns that concerned her. These candidates were technically proficient but lacked the deep water instincts that came from extensive experience. They followed procedures because instructors had taught them, not because they'd internalized why those procedures existed. The ascent was controlled, each team rising slowly with proper safety stops. Maya surfaced last with Martinez, pulling her regulator out to breathe surface air that tasted sweet after 20 minutes on tank oxygen. The boat ride back was quieter than the ride out. Candidates sat processing their first ocean dive. Some exhilarated, others subdued by the experience of operating in an environment that had tested them differently than any land-based evolution. Kane's group gathered at the stern, discussing their performance with the intensity of people analyzing a sporting event. That regulator drill was harder than pool training, Morrison admitted. The cold water made my hands clumsy. You adapted though, Kane replied. Second attempt was clean. Wilson, what happened with your knife? Brooks asked. Wilson's expression darkened. Fumbled it during the equipment swap. Jackson wouldn't let me retrieve it. Said depth was more important than gear. He was right, Kane said firmly. We stay within parameters. That's the discipline that keeps people alive. It was the correct response, showing Kane understood priorities. But Maya heard Morrison's muttered addition. Still seems like we should be capable of a simple knife recovery. There it was, the assumption that capability equaled permission, that being physically able to do something meant you should. It was a mindset Maya had seen before, usually right before it got people into trouble. If you're hooked on this story, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss an upload. Your support means everything and helps me bring you more inspiring military stories like this one. The afternoon brought a shift in training focus. Hammond gathered the candidates after lunch for an unexpected addition to the day's schedule. Change of plans, he announced. We're doing a combat conditioning exercise before evening dive. Full gear, beach run to the obstacle course, complete the O course, then water confidence evolution in the surf zone. Groans rippled through the assembled candidates. They'd already completed a physically demanding morning dive, and their bodies were tired from fighting cold water and managing heavy equipment. Problem, gentlemen? Hammond's voice carried an edge. You think enemy combatants care if you're tired? You think operations pause because you had a long morning? The groans stopped immediately. That's better. You've got 15 minutes to change into PT gear and assemble at the beach. Move. Maya watched the candidates disperse toward the changing facilities, then turned to find Lieutenant Commander Briggs approaching her position. Staff Sergeant, he said quietly, mind if we talk privately? They walked to a section of beach away from the training area, far enough that their conversation wouldn't be overheard. I received an updated tasking for your assessment. Briggs began. Hire wants you to conduct a practical evaluation of candidate performance under stress. Specifically, they want to know if current training adequately prepares candidates for the reality of operational decision-making. Maya nodded. That's consistent with my original orders. Right. But the new guidance is more explicit. They want you to directly test candidates' responses to unexpected challenges from someone they perceive as non-threatening. Briggs met her eyes. They want you to insert yourself into the training evolution and see how candidates react when their assumptions are challenged. You want me to break cover. Partially. Not your full background, but enough to create a teaching moment. Briggs gestured toward the training area where candidates were emerging in PT gear. That core group of 12 Kane's squad, they're the strongest performers, but they've developed blind spots. They assume they already know what excellence looks like because they've been excellent in this training environment. And you want me to show them they're wrong. I want you to show them there's always another level. That the strongest person in their current environment might not be the strongest person in a broader operational context. Briggs paused. But I need to know you're comfortable with this. It's going to challenge their egos in ways that might get confrontational. Maya smiled slightly. Sir, I've been confronted by actual enemy combatants. I think I can handle some trainees with hurt pride. I don't doubt that. But these aren't just any trainees, they're candidates who've proven themselves capable of extreme physical and mental endurance. Their confidence is earned, even if it's currently misdirected. How you handle this will impact their development as operators. Understood. Sir, what are the parameters? Briggs outlined the plan. During the obstacle course portion, Maya would participate alongside the candidates, ostensibly to document training procedures from a participant perspective. She'd be given the same time limits and expected to complete the same obstacles. The candidates would likely assume she'd struggle or fail. Her actual performance would force them to recalibrate their assumptions. One more thing, Briggs added. Senior Chief Hammond and the instructor team have been fully briefed. They'll support the evolution but won't intervene unless safety is compromised. This is your show. 20 minutes later, Maya stood at the beach assembly point, wearing PT gear that she'd retrieved from her duffel. Standard issue, navy PT shirt and shorts, the same uniform the candidates wore. Nothing special, nothing that would draw attention. Except for one detail that several candidates noticed immediately, her legs and arms showed the kind of muscle definition that came from years of functional strength training, not bodybuilding but practical power. And her exposed forearms revealed scars that couldn't be explained by desk work or administrative duties. Kane noticed. So did Morrison and Wilson. They exchanged glances but said nothing as Hammond called the formation to attention. Gentlemen, before we begin the evolution, we have a slight modification to today's training. Staff Sergeant Reeves will be participating in the obstacle course run to document procedural requirements from a participant perspective. The announcement created a ripple of surprise through the formation. Contractors didn't participate in candidate evolutions. They observed, documented, stayed safely on the sidelines. Morrison whispered to Kane, loud enough for others to hear. This should be entertaining. Hammond either didn't hear the comment or chose to ignore it. Standard rules apply. Beach run of 3 miles to the O course. Complete all obstacles in sequence. Return via beach run. Time standard is 45 minutes for candidates. Staff Sergeant Reeves will use the instructor standard of 40 minutes. That caused more murmurs. The instructor standard was faster than what they were expected to achieve, and they assumed it was being offered as a courtesy to someone who wouldn't come close to making any time standard. Formation, fall in behind me, Hammond ordered. We move in 3, 2, 1 go. The candidates surged forward, their competitive instincts taking over immediately. Even after a morning of diving, they attacked the beach run with the intensity of people determined to prove their superiority. Maya settled into position at the middle of the pack, maintaining a pace that looked comfortable but wasn't particularly fast. Several candidates passed her in the first quarter mile, their longer strides eating up distance. "Don't worry, ma'am," one of them called back, not unkindly. "Just finish at your own pace. Nobody expects you to keep up." Maya didn't respond, just maintained her steady rhythm. The soft sand made every step require extra effort, but her breathing remained controlled, her form efficient. At the 1 mile mark, she began to increase her pace. It was subtle at first, a slight lengthening of her stride, a marginal increase in turnover rate, but within a quarter mile, she'd moved from the middle of the pack to the front third of runners. Kane noticed her approaching his position and increased his own pace, determined not to be passed by a contractor. Morrison matched him, and soon several candidates were engaged in an unconscious race against someone they'd assumed would struggle to finish. Maya continued to accelerate. By the 2 mile mark, she'd passed everyone except the top 5 runners. Her breathing was elevated but still controlled, her form remaining efficient despite the grueling pace. The soft sand that had seemed to slow others appeared to barely affect her stride. Kane glanced back, surprised to see her closing on his position. He dug deeper, pulling from reserves he'd developed through months of brutal training. Maya passed him at the 2.25 mile mark. Her stride didn't change. Her breathing didn't deteriorate. She simply moved past him like he was standing still, then continued forward to pass the remaining 4 runners ahead of him. Morrison, running near Kane, gasped out, "What the hell?" By the time the group reached the obstacle course, Maya was leading by nearly 100 meters. She'd completed the 3-mile beach run in approximately 18 minutes, a pace that most of the candidates couldn't have maintained even on a track, much less on soft sand after a morning of diving. But she wasn't breathing hard, wasn't doubled over recovering. She simply transitioned immediately to the obstacle course, as if the run had been a warm-up. The SEAL obstacle course at Coronado was legendary, a series of challenges designed to test every aspect of physical capability. Rope climbs, wall traverses, balance beams, monkey bars, cargo nets, and the final challenge, the infamous slide for life, where candidates traversed a rope suspended over water using only their hands. Maya attacked the first obstacle, a 15-foot cargo net, with practiced efficiency. She didn't muscle her way up, like many candidates did. Instead, she used technique, finding footholds and distributing her weight to minimize energy expenditure. Up and over in less than 15 seconds. The parallel bars came next. Most candidates struggled with these, their upper body fatigue from the run making it difficult to maintain the required pace. Maya's form was textbook perfect, elbows locked, body straight, moving hand over hand with metronomic consistency. Kane arrived at the obstacle course entrance as Maya completed the parallel bars. He stood there for a moment, breathing hard, watching her attack the balance beam with the same controlled precision she'd shown on every previous challenge. "She's not struggling," Wilson panted, arriving beside Kane. "At all. How is she not struggling?" Kane had no answer. He forced himself to start his own obstacle course run, but his mind was reeling. They'd assumed the contractor lady was just an administrator. Clearly, they'd assumed wrong. The rest of the candidates arrived in a staggered stream, beginning their own obstacle course attempts. But attention kept drifting to Maya's performance. She moved through obstacles like water flowing downhill, finding the path of least resistance. Using technique and efficiency rather than brute strength. The rope climb was particularly revealing. Most candidates attacked it with upper body power, hauling themselves up through sheer muscular effort. Maya used a technique that distributed the work across her entire body. J-hook, foot wrap, push with legs, minimal arm pull. She ascended the 30-foot rope in under 20 seconds and came down almost as fast, using a controlled descent that spoke of extensive practice. "That's a military technique," Martinez observed to Hammond, both instructors watching Maya's performance with professional appreciation. "Not just military, that's the SEAL method we teach in advanced courses." Hammond nodded slowly. Lieutenant Commander Briggs mentioned she had dive experience. "I'm starting to think her background is more extensive than some experience." By the time Maya reached the final obstacle, the slide for life, she'd completed the entire course in 14 minutes. The candidate standard was 25 minutes. The instructor standard was 18. She'd beaten both by significant margins. The slide for life was a rope suspended over a pool of water, angled downward from a 30-foot tower. Candidates had to traverse the entire length using only their hands, with their bodies hanging below. Failure meant dropping into the water and repeating the obstacle. Maya climbed the tower, chalked her hands from the bag at the top, and grabbed the rope without hesitation. Then she executed the traverse with a speed that made several instructors blink in surprise. She used an over-under technique, right hand over the rope, left hand under, pull and switch, maintaining constant forward momentum. No pauses, no rest positions. Just continuous movement across the 50-foot span. She completed it in 32 seconds. The candidates who'd finished their own course runs stood at the ending area, watching in stunned silence as Maya dropped from the rope and landed in a stable crouch that absorbed the impact through her legs. She stood, brushed chalk dust from her hands, and checked her watch. 23 minutes, 47 seconds total time from start of beach run to completion of obstacle course. She'd beaten the instructor standard by more than 16 minutes. And she wasn't breathing like someone who'd just completed a brutal physical evolution. She looked like she could do it again immediately if asked. Kane approached, his own uniform soaked with sweat, his chest still heaving from exertion. "Ma'am, that was... how did you?" Maya turned to face him, and for the first time since arriving at Coronado, she let her professional mask slip slightly. Her expression wasn't smug or superior. It was simply matter of fact. "Physical fitness is part of any complete training program, Petty Officer Kane. But you're a contractor, a civilian. You're not supposed to be able to." He trailed off, awareness dawning. The other candidates from Kane's core group had gathered now, all of them staring at Maya with expressions that mixed shock, confusion, and the beginning of understanding that they'd made serious errors in judgment. Morrison found his voice first. "Ma'am, no disrespect, but what the hell was that? Nobody runs that fast on soft sand after diving all morning. Nobody completes the O course that quickly except the top instructors. Unless I've done it before." Maya finished for him. "Many times before. You're military," Wilson stated. No longer a question. "I have been." "Yes. What branch?" Brooks asked. "Marines? Army?" Maya considered how much to reveal. Briggs had authorized her to break cover partially, to create a teaching moment, but full disclosure of her SEAL background wasn't part of that authorization. "I've served in various capacities," she said carefully, "some of which included training similar to what you're experiencing now." Senior Chief Hammond approached the group, his timing perfect. "Staff Sergeant Reeves is here on special assignment to evaluate training methodologies. Her background includes extensive operational experience that makes her uniquely qualified for this assessment." The use of Staff Sergeant and operational experience provided enough information to shift candidate perspectives without revealing everything. "Your special operations," Kane said slowly, the pieces falling into place. "You've been through training like this. That's why you move like someone who's done it before," Maya supplied. "Yes, Petty Officer. I have operational experience in environments similar to what you're training for." The impact of this revelation rippled through the gathered candidates. For days, they dismissed her as irrelevant, as someone who couldn't possibly understand their world. They'd patronized her, joked about her, made assumptions based on her civilian appearance and contractor status. And she'd been evaluating them, the entire time, with the eyes of someone who'd already walked the path they were just beginning. The evening dive was scheduled for 1,800 hours a night evolution designed to test candidates' ability to operate in darkness with limited visibility. But before they could return to the water, Hammond called an extended break for candidates to eat, rest, and prepare mentally for the challenge ahead. Kane's 12-man group sat apart from the other candidates, their usual confident banter replaced by subdued discussion. "We screwed up," Morrison said bluntly. "We spent 2 days making fun of someone who's probably more qualified than most of our instructors. We don't know her full background," Wilson pointed out. "She said she has operational experience, but that could mean a lot of things." "Dude, she crushed the O course by 16 minutes, Brooks countered. "That's not some experience. That's elite-level performance. The kind of performance you only get from serious special operations training." Kane sat quietly, processing everything they'd witnessed. His analytical mind was working through the clues they'd all missed: her movement efficiency, her tactical observations during previous exercises, the way senior instructors like Hammond and Briggs treated her with a respect that went beyond normal contractor courtesy. "I think she's SEAL qualified," he said finally. The statement hung in the air like a dropped bomb. "Women can't be SEALs," Morrison replied automatically, then caught himself. "I mean, the program only officially integrated recently, and the first female candidates are still in training. She's too old to be one of them." "The program only integrated officially," Kane emphasized. "But there were test programs before that. Limited trials to assess feasibility." He looked at his teammates. What if she was part of one of those trials? What if she completed SEAL training years ago under classified protocols? It seemed impossible. But so did beating their entire class in a beach run and obstacle course after a morning of diving. "If that's true," Wilson said slowly, "then we've been mocking a SEAL for 2 days straight, while she watched us perform basic training evolutions that she probably completed a decade ago." The implications settled over the group like a heavy blanket. They'd been so certain of their own capabilities, so convinced that surviving Hell Week made them special, that they'd failed to recognize true expertise when it was standing right in front of them. "We need to apologize," Kane decided. "Before the night dive. We need to acknowledge our assumptions and make it right." "Agreed," Morrison said, the others nodding. They found Maya near the dive equipment staging area, reviewing tank pressure gauges with one of the instructor divers. She looked up as they approached, her expression neutral but her eyes showing awareness of their intent. "Staff Sergeant Reeves," Kane began formally. Coming to attention, his 11 teammates followed suit, creating a line of SEAL candidates standing at attention before someone they'd dismissed as irrelevant just hours before. "At ease, gentlemen," Maya said quietly. "This isn't a formal setting." "With respect, ma'am." "It should be." Kane took a breath. "We owe you an apology. We made assumptions based on your civilian appearance and contractor status. We were dismissive, condescending, and we failed to recognize that someone with your capabilities might have legitimate reasons for maintaining a low profile." It was well said, demonstrating the leadership qualities that had made Kane honor man. He wasn't making excuses or minimizing their behavior, he was owning it completely. "We were wrong," Morrison added. "Not just wrong to be disrespectful, but wrong to assume we understood what operational capability looked like. Your performance today showed us we still have a lot to learn." Maya studied the 12 young men standing before her. They were sincere in their apology, genuinely humbled by their mistake. This was exactly the teaching moment Briggs had hoped for, a chance for candidates to learn that assumptions could be dangerous, that real expertise often didn't announce itself. "Apology accepted," she said simply. "But I want you to understand something. I didn't maintain a low profile to trap you, or make you look foolish. I did it because my assignment requires me to observe training methodologies without influencing candidate behavior. Your observation of us behaving like arrogant idiots," Wilson said wryly. Maya allowed herself a slight smile. "You're not idiots. You're young warriors who've accomplished something genuinely difficult by completing Hell Week and making it this far in training. That accomplishment deserves respect." She paused, her expression becoming more serious. "But you've learned the wrong lesson from your success. You think because you're the strongest candidates in your class, you're already operational SEALs. You're not. You're students who've proven you can suffer physically. The real test is whether you can think tactically, adapt constantly, and recognize that there's always more to learn." The words landed with weight because they came from someone who'd just demonstrated capabilities that exceeded their entire class. "Can I ask, ma'am," Brooks ventured, "what your actual background is? The instructors called you Staff Sergeant, which is an Army or Marine rank, but your dive skills and O-course performance suggest." He trailed off, unsure how to finish the question without making more assumptions. Maya considered how to respond. Briggs had authorized partial disclosure, but her full background remained classified for reasons that went beyond training assessment. "I can tell you that I've completed training similar to what you're experiencing," she said carefully. "I've served in operational capacities that required expertise in diving, land warfare, and tactical operations. My current assignment is to evaluate whether the SEAL training pipeline adequately prepares candidates for the realities they'll face during actual deployments." It was more information than she'd provided before, but still carefully bounded. The candidates absorbed it, reading between the lines. "You've been downrange," Kane stated. "In combat deployments." "Yes. And you're evaluating whether our training prepares us for what you've experienced in the field." "That's correct." Morrison's expression shifted to something approaching awe. "Ma'am, that means you're assessing us based on actual combat experience, not just training knowledge. You know what works and what doesn't because you've done it for real." "I have perspective that comes from operational experience," Maya confirmed, "but I'm also aware that my experience is limited to specific time periods and operational theaters. The threats you'll face might be different from what I encountered. So I'm evaluating foundational capabilities, your ability to think under pressure, adapt to changing circumstances, and function as part of a team." "How are we doing?" Wilson asked, then immediately looked embarrassed by the question. But Maya took it seriously. "You're physically capable and mentally tough. You've proven you can push through discomfort and maintain performance when exhausted. Those are essential qualities." She paused. "But you're still thinking like individual athletes rather than team operators. You compete with each other instead of elevating each other. You focus on being the strongest person in your immediate environment, instead of recognizing that operational effectiveness comes from collective capability." The critique was delivered without anger or condescension, just straightforward assessment. That made it land even harder. "Today's evolution showed you something important," Maya continued. "You assumed physical capability was the measure of competence. But physical performance without tactical thinking is just athletics. SEALs need both the physical capability to execute demanding operations and the tactical wisdom to know which operations are worth executing." Hammond approached the group, his timing suggesting he'd been waiting for the right moment to interrupt. "Candidates, you have 30 minutes before we begin night dive brief. I suggest you use that time to rest and prepare mentally. Darkness changes everything underwater." Kane's group dispersed, but their body language had transformed from the confident swagger of earlier in the day to something more thoughtful, more humble. As they walked away, Morrison voiced what several of them were thinking. "We just got schooled by someone who's probably forgotten more about special operations than we've learned so far." "Good," Kane replied. "That means we have someone here who can actually teach us what we need to know instead of just testing whether we can suffer." Hammond remained behind, with Maya, watching the candidates prepare for the evening evolution. "That went well," he observed. You challenged their assumptions without crushing their confidence. That's a difficult balance. They're good candidates, Maya replied. They just needed perspective adjustment. Agreed. But I'm curious. How much are you authorized to reveal about your background? Because I've been in this community for 23 years, and I recognize capabilities when I see them. That O-course performance wasn't just similar training. That was SEAL-level expertise. Maya met his eyes. Senior Chief, my full background is classified at levels that prevent detailed discussion. What I can tell you is that I have extensive operational experience in special operations environments, and I've been specifically selected for this assessment because that experience gives me perspective on training effectiveness. Hammond nodded slowly. Understood. And for what it's worth, I'm glad you're here. These candidates need to see that excellence comes in forms they might not expect, challenges assumptions that could get them killed in the field. As evening approached and the candidates prepared for their night dive, Maya reflected on the day's events. The physical demonstration had accomplished its purpose, forcing Kane's group to recalibrate their understanding of capability and expertise. But the real test was still coming. Night diving would reveal whether they could apply the lessons they'd learned, whether humility would translate into better performance, or whether injured pride would make them resistant to instruction. The ocean at night was unforgiving. It revealed character in ways that daylight evolutions never could. Maya had survived night dives in conditions far more challenging than this training evolution. She'd conducted combat dives in hostile waters, navigating by feel and memory to reach objectives that required absolute precision. These candidates were about to get their first taste of that darkness, and Maya would be watching to see who adapted and who broke. The Pacific Ocean at night was a different entity entirely from its daytime counterpart. The water that had appeared blue-green and inviting under sunlight now looked black and impenetrable, a liquid void that swallowed light and sound with equal indifference. The temperature had dropped to 56 degrees, and a light fog was rolling in from the west, reducing visibility on the surface to less than 100 feet. Maya stood on the dive boat with her gear already assembled, watching the candidates conduct their pre-dive checks with noticeably more tension than they'd shown that morning. Night diving was a psychological challenge as much as a physical one, operating in darkness where your vision was limited to whatever your dive light illuminated, where the ocean floor disappeared into blackness below and the surface became invisible above. Kane's group worked through their equipment checks with methodical precision, but Maya noticed the small tells that revealed their stress. Morrison checked his light batteries 3 times. Wilson kept adjusting his weight belt even though it was already properly configured. Brooks's hands trembled slightly as he connected his BC inflator hose. They were scared. Good. Fear kept you alert. Senior Chief Hammond stood at the bow, his silhouette backlit by the boat's running lights. Behind him, the lights of Coronado glowed in the distance, a reminder of civilization that would disappear once they descended into the depths. Listen up. Hammond's voice cut through the fog and nervous conversation. Night diving is where we separate candidates who can control their minds from candidates who let their minds control them. Every skill you've practiced in daylight becomes 10 times harder in darkness. Navigation requires constant attention. Buoyancy control demands perfect awareness. And if you panic, if you lose control, the darkness will amplify that panic until you're a danger to yourself and your buddy. The candidates listened with an intensity that hadn't been present during morning briefings. They understood that this evolution would test them differently than anything they'd experienced in the training pipeline so far. We'll descend in buddy pairs as usual, Hammond continued. But tonight we're adding a complication. Each pair will conduct a navigation exercise, swim a predetermined course underwater using compass headings and distance estimation. You'll surface at designated waypoints. Confirm your position with the safety boat. Then continue to the next waypoint. Total course is approximately 600 meters. Any questions? Kane raised his hand. Senior Chief, what's our margin of error for navigation accuracy? Good question. You need to surface within 25 meters of each waypoint. Beyond that, you've failed the navigation element and will be pulled from the dive to reassess your skills. 25 meters sounded like a generous margin until you considered that you'd be swimming in darkness with only a compass and your ability to estimate distance traveled. No GPS, no electronic aids, just basic underwater navigation skills that SEALs had been using for decades. Staff Sergeant Reeves will be diving with the instructor team, Hammond added, gesturing toward Maya. She'll be conducting her assessment observations from the water. Do not mistake her presence for additional safety coverage. She's there to evaluate, not to rescue you if you make mistakes. Several candidates glanced at Maya with new awareness. After the afternoon's demonstration, they understood she wasn't just a contractor documenting procedures. She was someone with expertise evaluating whether their training was adequate. First pair Kane and Morrison. Your course is heading 270 degrees magnetic, 200 meters. Then heading 360 degrees, 200 meters. Then heading 200 meters, 090 degrees, 200 meters. You should surface back at the boat if your navigation is accurate. Kane and Morrison moved to the entry position, their dive lights attached to their BCs, their compasses strapped to their wrists. They looked at each other, exchanged the fist bump that had become their pre-dive ritual, then at Hammond's signal, rolled backward into the black water. The splash seemed louder in the darkness, more final. Then they were gone, swallowed by the ocean with only bubbles marking their descent. Maya entered the water with Martinez for the third pair's navigation course. The cold hit harder at night, the psychological impact of darkness making the temperature seem more severe. But her breathing remained steady, controlled, exactly the rhythm she'd maintained through hundreds of night dives in far more challenging conditions. The descent through darkness was disorienting for anyone not accustomed to it. The narrow beam of her dive light created a dazing, small cone of visibility. But beyond that cone existed only blackness. Sound was muffled except for her own breathing and the occasional ping of the boat's positioning beacon transmitted through the water. At 60 feet, Maya leveled out and checked her position. Martinez gave her the thumbs up, confirming they were at depth and ready to begin their observation duties. They swam slowly toward the area where Kane and Morrison should be conducting their first navigation leg. Maya's dive light swept through the darkness, catching occasional glimpses of other dive teams working their courses. The visibility was reduced at night, maybe 20 feet, at best, which meant you could swim within a few meters of another diver and never see them if lights weren't pointed in the right direction. She found Kane and Morrison about 5 minutes into their dive. They were swimming side by side, Kane checking his compass while Morrison managed their depth control. Their coordination was good, their swim pace steady. But Maya noticed Kane kept checking his compass with a frequency that suggested uncertainty about whether he was holding the correct heading. Navigation underwater was deceptively difficult. You had to account for current drift, maintain consistent depth, estimate distance traveled based on kick cycles, and constantly verify heading. Small errors accumulated quickly, and in darkness, it was easy to become disoriented and swim in completely wrong directions. Maya watched them complete their first leg and surface at what they thought was the first waypoint. Through the water, she heard the muffled sound of voices as they confirmed their position with the safety boat. Martinez tapped her shoulder and pointed. He'd spotted another team that appeared to be struggling. Their lights were stationary, and one diver's breathing pattern suggested stress or possible panic. They swam closer, and Maya recognized Wilson and Brooks. Wilson was hovering at about 50 feet, his light beam sweeping frantically in wide arcs. Brooks was trying to calm him, holding his BC and making exaggerated hand signals to breathe slowly. Maya approached close enough to assess the situation, but maintained enough distance to avoid interfering unless absolutely necessary. Wilson's breathing was rapid but not yet at panic levels. He seemed disoriented rather than in immediate danger. Brooks noticed Maya and Martinez. Even in the darkness, his body language showed embarrassment at their situation. He pointed to Wilson, then made a spinning motion with his finger. His buddy had lost orientation and couldn't determine which direction was up. It was a common problem in night diving, especially for inexperienced divers. Without visual reference points, The inner ear could provide false information about orientation. The solution was simple. Watch your bubbles. They always rise. Maya pointed upward, then at the bubbles streaming from Wilson's regulator. Brooks understood and directed Wilson's attention to his own bubbles. After a moment, Wilson's breathing began to slow as he reoriented himself using this basic reference. Crisis averted. But it had revealed something important. Wilson's confidence from earlier in the day had evaporated when confronted with an environment where physical strength meant nothing and mental control meant everything. The dive continued for another 40 minutes, with varying degrees of success across the different buddy pairs. Some teams completed their navigation courses with impressive accuracy, surfacing within meters of their intended waypoints. Others struggled, with compass errors or distance estimation problems, sending them far off course. Kane and Morrison finished their course with solid performance, not perfect, but well within acceptable parameters. When Maya surfaced near the dive boat at the evolution's conclusion, she saw them already aboard, discussing their performance with the analytical intensity of people determined to improve. The boat ride back to shore was quieter than after the morning dive. The darkness and the mental challenge of underwater navigation had sobered even the most confident candidates. They understood now that SEAL operations required more than physical toughness. They required the ability to function effectively in conditions designed to overwhelm human senses. The post-dive debrief took place in a classroom adjacent to the training compound. Candidates sat in rows, still wearing their wetsuits, while Hammond reviewed the evening's performance using a whiteboard to illustrate navigation principles and common errors. Maya sat in the back of the room, taking notes on her tablet but mostly watching candidate reactions to Hammond's instruction. After the day's events, her physical demonstration, and the challenges of night diving, the candidates were notably more receptive to instruction than they'd been previously. Kane's group sat together as usual, but their earlier swagger had been replaced by focused attention. They were listening to Hammond's technical explanation of compass deviation and current compensation. Like students who understood, they still had much to learn. Hammond finished his brief and opened the floor for questions. Several hands went up immediately. "Senior Chief," one candidate asked, "how do you develop the instinct for underwater navigation? The feeling for distance traveled and heading accuracy?" "Repetition," Hammond replied. "You do it over and over until your body learns to estimate kick cycles, and your brain learns to compensate for environmental factors automatically. There are no shortcuts, just hundreds of hours underwater building experience." "How many dives does it typically take to develop that instinct?" Hammond considered the question. "For most SEALs, you start feeling confident in your underwater navigation after about 50 to 75 dives. True mastery comes after several hundred dives in varying conditions." Morrison raised his hand. "Senior Chief, what about in combat situations? How does navigation work when you're also concerned about enemy activity?" It was a tactical question, showing Morrison was thinking beyond training scenarios to operational reality. "Good question. Combat diving adds complexity because you're managing multiple priorities simultaneously. Navigation, enemy awareness, objective accomplishment, team coordination. It requires significant mental discipline to maintain navigation accuracy while processing all those additional inputs." Hammond paused, then made a decision. "Staff Sergeant Reeves, you have operational diving experience. Would you like to address how combat conditions affect underwater navigation?" The question shifted every candidate's attention to Maya. They were eager to hear from someone who'd actually done what they were training to do. Maya stood and moved to the front of the classroom. For a moment, she considered how much to reveal, how much operational detail she could share without violating classification restrictions. "Senior Chief Hammond is correct that combat diving requires managing multiple priorities," she began. "But the foundation is the same navigation skills you're learning now. If you can't navigate accurately in training conditions, you'll have no chance in combat when you're also dealing with threat awareness and mission objectives." She paused, remembering specific missions that illustrated her point. "I've conducted combat dives where navigation accuracy was the difference between mission success and catastrophic failure. Surfacing 50 meters off target might mean surfacing in an enemy patrol zone instead of your planned infiltration point. It might mean missing your objective window and compromising an entire operation. The candidates listened with absolute attention. This wasn't theoretical instruction, this was hard-won knowledge from someone who'd faced the consequences of mistakes. The skills you're building now, compass work, distance estimation, depth control, these aren't just training requirements. They're life and death capabilities that you'll rely on when the stakes are real. Maya met Kane's eyes, then Morrison's, then scanned the entire room. That's why humility matters. You need to accept that you're still learning, that every dive teaches you something new, that the ocean will always have lessons to offer if you're willing to listen. Ma'am, Brooks asked, how do you manage the fear? When you're diving in hostile territory, knowing that surfacing in the wrong place could get you killed? It was a vulnerable question, admitting to fear in front of peers who'd been taught that SEALs didn't experience fear. Maya appreciated his honesty. You don't eliminate fear, you learn to function with it. Fear is your body's warning system, it heightens awareness and sharpens focus. The key is controlling your response to fear rather than letting it control you. She thought back to a specific mission off the coast of Somalia, where her team had infiltrated a harbor at night to gather intelligence on a high-value target's vessel. The fear had been constant fear of detection, fear of equipment failure, fear of currents sweeping them off course into hostile territory. I've been afraid on every combat dive I've conducted, Maya admitted. But I've also learned to trust my training, trust my equipment, and trust my team. That trust allows you to function even when fear is present. Wilson raised his hand tentatively. Ma'am, earlier today you said you were evaluating whether our training prepares us for operational reality. Based on what you've observed, does it? It was the fundamental question underlying her entire assessment. Maya chose her words carefully. The physical training you're receiving is excellent. The Navy has refined SEAL training over decades to produce operators with exceptional physical capabilities and mental toughness. What I'm evaluating is whether the pipeline adequately develops tactical thinking and decision-making skills alongside physical prowess. She gestured to the navigation charts Hammond had been using. Tonight's evolution showed that some of you excel at following procedures when clearly instructed, but struggle when faced with uncertainty or unexpected challenges. That's natural, you're still learning. But operational environments are almost entirely composed of uncertainty and unexpected challenges. So how do we develop better tactical thinking? Kane asked. By questioning everything. Maya replied. Don't just execute procedures because an instructor told you to understand why those procedures exist. When you complete an evolution, don't just celebrate success or bemoan failure. Analyze what decisions led to the outcome and how you could improve those decisions. She walked to the whiteboard and began sketching a diagram. Tonight, several teams went off course during navigation. The natural response is to blame environmental factors, current, visibility, equipment. But effective operators ask different questions. Did I verify my compass heading before starting? Did I account for known current patterns? Did I communicate effectively with my buddy about our position? The candidates watched her sketch out a decision-making flowchart that showed how small choices accumulated into successful or failed outcomes. This kind of analytical thinking is what separates good operators from great ones, Maya continued. Physical capability gets you through training. Tactical thinking keeps you alive in combat. Lieutenant Commander Briggs entered the classroom quietly, standing near the back. Maya noticed but continued her instruction. One more thing you need to understand, she said. Being a SEAL isn't about being the toughest individual. It's about being part of a team where every member elevates everyone else's capabilities. Tonight, I saw buddy pairs where one diver struggled and the other helped them succeed. That's the right instinct. But I also saw pairs where ego prevented effective communication, where one diver's need to prove individual capability compromised the team's performance. She looked directly at Morrison, who'd shown frustration when Wilson had struggled during the dive. Your buddy's success is your success. Their failure is your failure. Until you internalize that principle, you're just athletic individuals wearing the same uniform. When you truly understand it, you'll become operators. The classroom was silent as candidates processed her words. This was instruction they'd heard before from their regular instructors. But hearing it from someone with operational experience gave it different weight. Briggs stepped forward. "Thank you, Staff Sergeant. That was excellent instruction." He turned to Hammond. "Senior Chief, I need to borrow Staff Sergeant Reeves for a classified brief. Can you handle the remainder of tonight's debrief?" "Absolutely, sir." Maya gathered her tablet and followed Briggs out of the classroom. Once they were in a secure office with the door closed, Briggs's demeanor shifted to something more serious. "Hire has made a decision about your assessment timeline," he said without preamble. "They want your full evaluation report within 24 hours, including recommendations on pipeline modifications and integration protocols." Maya's expression tightened. "Sir, I've only been observing for 2 days. A comprehensive assessment requires more time to evaluate multiple evolution types and candidate responses across varying conditions. I know, and I pushed back on the timeline. But there are political pressures at play above our level. The integration question is being decided now, and they need your operational expertise to inform that decision." Briggs pulled out a classified folder. "I'm authorized to give you additional context that might inform your assessment." He opened the folder to reveal photographs of 3 female candidates currently in various stages of SEAL training pipeline. These are the first official female candidates attempting SEAL qualification. One is currently in Hell Week. One is in dive phase. One is in advanced training. Maya studied the photographs. The candidates looked determined, capable, physically fit, but photographs revealed nothing about mental toughness or tactical aptitude. Hire wants to know whether the current pipeline adequately prepares female candidates for operational reality, or whether modifications are needed to account for physiological differences while maintaining operational standards. "That's a complex question with no simple answer," Maya replied. "I know. That's why they sent you someone who's actually done the job, can provide perspective that academic studies can't." Briggs leaned back in his chair. "Maya, between us, what's your assessment? Not the official report, just your gut instinct based on what you've seen." Maya was quiet for a moment, organizing her thoughts. "The training is excellent at producing physically capable candidates. The evolutions test endurance, pain tolerance, and mental toughness effectively. But there's a gap between training proficiency and operational effectiveness." "Explain." Kane and his group are perfect examples. They're exceptionally strong performers in the training environment. They've excelled at every evolution, demonstrated impressive physical capabilities, and shown genuine commitment to becoming SEALs. But they've also developed blind spots. They assume that succeeding in training means they understand operational reality. They compete with each other instead of elevating each other. They focus on individual performance rather than team effectiveness. "And how does that relate to female integration?" Maya met Briggs's eyes. "Sir, the gender of the candidate is less important than their ability to think tactically and function as part of a team. A female candidate who understands team dynamics and tactical decision-making is more valuable than a male candidate who's individually stronger but lacks those cognitive skills. Matter. We can't lower them just to facilitate integration." "Agreed. But physical standards should be based on operational requirements, not arbitrary benchmarks. If an operation requires carrying a 200-pound teammate 200 meters, then that's the standard everyone must meet, regardless of gender. But if we're setting standards based on traditional male physiology without clear operational justification, we're potentially excluding capable operators for the wrong reasons." Briggs nodded thoughtfully. "That's going to be controversial. The truth usually is. But sir, I've operated with female teammates in combat zones. I've seen women perform with exceptional courage and competence in situations where physical strength mattered less than tactical thinking and adaptability. The question isn't whether women can be SEALs, the question is whether we're training all candidates, male and female, to think like operators instead of just perform like athletes. And your answer? The current pipeline does a good job of the latter, but could improve on the former. That's true regardless of integration questions. Briggs absorbed this, then made a decision. All right, here's what we're going to do. Tomorrow morning, I'm authorizing you to conduct a practical evaluation with Class 342. You'll design a scenario that tests tactical decision-making under stress, and you'll observe how candidates respond when faced with situations that require thinking rather than just physical execution. What kind of scenario? That's your call. You're the one with operational experience. Design something that simulates the kind of decision-making you faced in combat. Then evaluate whether these candidates are prepared for that reality. Maya's mind was already working through possibilities. I'll need authorization to break cover completely. If I'm going to test their tactical thinking, they need to understand they're being evaluated by someone with actual combat experience. Authorized. Tomorrow morning, you reveal your full background to Class 342, then conduct your evaluation scenario. We'll use the results to inform recommendations on both general pipeline improvements and integration protocols. After the meeting concluded, Maya returned to her temporary quarters and began planning the next day's evaluation. The scenario needed to test multiple skills simultaneously: tactical thinking, team coordination, decision-making under pressure, and the ability to adapt when situations didn't go according to plan. She pulled up mission reports from her operational deployments, looking for scenarios that could be adapted for training purposes. One mission stood out: a village clearance operation where her team had encountered unexpected civilians in a target building, requiring split-second decisions about rules of engagement and force protection. She began sketching out how to simulate that complexity in a training environment. The scenario would include multiple elements: incomplete intelligence, time pressure, potential civilian presence, equipment malfunction, and leadership challenges when the initial plan fell apart. It would push candidates beyond their comfort zones, forcing them to think rather than just execute. And it would reveal whether Class 342, particularly Kane's core group, had learned the lessons about humility and tactical thinking, or whether they still believed physical prowess was enough. Morning formation at 0600 hours found Class 342 assembled on the grinder in standard PT gear, confused about why they weren't in dive suits for the scheduled pool evolution. The fog had lifted overnight, revealing a clear sky and calm ocean. Perfect conditions for water work. But instead of Hammond or the usual instructor team, Lieutenant Commander Briggs stood before them with Maya at his side. She wasn't dressed in contractor, casual clothes, or PT gear. She wore full Navy combat uniform with rank insignia clearly visible on her collar and chest. The candidates stared. Several did double takes, trying to reconcile the contractor they'd dismissed with the staff sergeant standing before them in uniform. Class 342. Attention! Briggs commanded. The candidates snapped to attention with practiced precision. Today's training evolution has been modified to accommodate a special assessment, Briggs announced. For the past 2 days, you have been observed and evaluated by Staff Sergeant Maya Reeves, United States Navy. Special Warfare Operator. First Class. The formal designation landed like a physical blow. Special Warfare Operator First Class meant she wasn't just SEAL qualified, she was an experienced operator with significant time in teams. Staff Sergeant Reeves completed SEAL training 7 years ago as part of a classified integration trial program. Briggs continued, revealing information that made several candidates' eyes widen in shock. Since then, she has completed 4 combat deployments, totaling 18 months in hostile territory, conducted operations in 3 different theaters, and earned multiple commendations for actions under fire. He paused, letting that information sink in. She is here to evaluate whether our training pipeline adequately prepares candidates for the operational realities she has experienced firsthand. Today, she will conduct a practical assessment scenario, designed to test your tactical decision-making and team coordination under stress. Briggs stepped back, turning the formation over to Maya. She moved to the front, and when she spoke, her voice carried a different quality than it had before, the command authority of someone accustomed to leading combat operations. Gentlemen, everything you've learned in training so far has been preparation for the real work of being a SEAL. Today, we're going to simulate a portion of that real work and see how effectively you can apply your training to complex operational situations. She gestured toward the training compound, where several instructors were setting up equipment in what appeared to be a mock village scenario. The scenario is this. Your SEAL element has been tasked with clearing a compound where high-value target intelligence suggests a terrorist cell leader is meeting with several associates. Time-sensitive intelligence indicates the meeting is happening now, and your element has been given execute authority to conduct immediate action. The candidates listened with intense focus. This was closer to real-world tasking than anything they'd practiced before. However, Maya continued, as with most real operations, the intelligence is incomplete and partially inaccurate. The compound layout doesn't match the diagrams you were provided. Local civilians are present in adjacent buildings. Your communications equipment experiences intermittent failure, and your element leader becomes incapacitated during the initial breach, requiring others to assume command and adapt the plan in real time. She pulled out a tactical map showing the compound layout, or at least the layout they would be told to expect, which wouldn't match reality. You will be divided into 3 elements of 4 candidates each. Each element will execute the scenario independently, and I will evaluate your tactical decision-making, team coordination, and ability to adapt when faced with unexpected complications. Kane raised his hand. Ma'am, what are the rules of engagement for this scenario? Excellent question. Standard ROE, for hostile territory, positive identification before engaging, minimize civilian casualties, proportional force only. You'll be using simunition marking rounds, so accuracy matters. Any candidate who violates ROE or makes a REM decision that would have gotten teammates killed in a real operation fails the evolution. The stakes were clear, and the candidates understood they were being tested at a level beyond basic proficiency. First element: Kane, Morrison, Wilson, Brooks. You're up in 10 minutes. Use that time to review the intelligence packet and develop your plan. The 4 designated candidates moved to a planning area where folders containing mission briefing materials waited for them. The rest of Class 342 watched with a mixture of anxiety and eagerness. Anxiety about eventually facing this test themselves, eagerness to see how their classmates performed. Maya walked to the observation area where Senior Chief Hammond, Chief Jackson, and several other instructors had gathered to watch the evolution. This is ambitious, Hammond observed. Most candidates don't face this level of complexity until advanced training. I know, Maya replied, but combat doesn't wait for advanced training. I want to see if they can think tactically under pressure, or if they'll revert to simple rehearsed procedures when faced with chaos. The scenario compound had been prepared with impressive attention to detail. Multiple buildings with rooms that could be reconfigured, role players acting as both hostiles and civilians, simunition weapons that fired marking rounds painful enough to feel but not dangerous enough to cause injury. Maya had worked with the instructor team to set up specific complications. A door that would jam during entry, requiring breaching improvisation. A role player in traditional local dress who would be armed but not immediately threatening, testing identification decisions. A communications radio programmed to fail at a critical moment, forcing verbal coordination under stress. Kane's element completed their planning and moved to the start position. They divided responsibilities. Kane as element leader, Morrison as primary breacher, Wilson on security, Brooks as rear security. Their plan was solid, showing they'd absorbed basic tactical principles. What they didn't know was that their plan would fall apart within the first 30 seconds. Execute, 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 Maya called out, starting the scenario. Kane's element moved toward the compound with reasonable tactical discipline. They maintained spacing, checked corners, communicated with hand signals. Their approach showed competence. They'd learned the mechanics of movement. Morrison reached the primary entry door and prepared his breaching charge. But when he attempted to attach it, the door mechanism jammed exactly as Maya had programmed it to do. He tried to force it, wasting precious seconds while the element's exposure time increased. Kane adapted quickly, redirecting the element to a secondary entry point. Good decision. Don't waste time fighting obstacles when alternatives exist. But at the secondary entry, they encountered the first major complication: a civilian role player who stepped into their path. Hands visible but showing clear signs of fear. The element froze, unsure how to handle the unexpected presence. Move him, Kane ordered Morrison. Morrison approached the role player to physically relocate him, but in doing so, he turned his back on an uncleared doorway. The hostile role player inside that doorway engaged with simunition rounds, striking Morrison in the back. "Morrison, you're down," Maya called out from the observation area. "Your element is now 3 operators with 1 casualty." The scenario had just gotten significantly more complicated. Kane's expression showed the stress of command as he processed the changed situation. He had to secure the casualty, continue the mission, and adapt his plan, all while maintaining situational awareness and following ROE. "Wilson, security on Morrison. Brooks, with me. We're pushing through." It was a reasonable decision under pressure, showing Kane could prioritize mission accomplishment while ensuring casualty security. But it also meant they were now clearing a multi-room compound with only 2 operators instead of 4. They pushed into the building, clearing rooms with increasing urgency. Their technique deteriorated under stress. Spacing became inconsistent. Communication broke down. Corners went unchecked. They were reverting to rushed execution instead of disciplined procedure. In the target room, they found 2 role players, one clearly armed and hostile, one in civilian clothes who might or might not be a threat. The ambiguity was intentional, designed to test decision-making under pressure. Kane called out, "Hands! Show me hands!" The armed role player complied immediately, dropping his weapon. The civilian role player made an ambiguous movement toward his waistband, reaching for identification papers as he'd been instructed, but in a way that could be interpreted as reaching for a weapon. Brooks fired immediately, striking the civilian role player with simunition. "Brooks, hold fire!" Kane shouted, but it was too late. "Brooks," Maya called out, "you just shot an unarmed civilian who was reaching for his identification. The action was within your authority based on perceived threat, but it represents a significant tactical and diplomatic incident that would have major operational consequences." Brooks's face went pale. In the scenario's logic, he'd made a split-second decision that was defensible from a force protection perspective, but represented exactly the kind of mistake that could turn local populations against American forces and compromise broader mission objectives. The scenario concluded with Kane's element securing the compound, but having suffered 1 casualty and 1 civilian shooting. It was a mixed-outcome mission technically accomplished, but at a cost that would have resulted in significant after-action investigation in a real operation. Maya gathered Kane's element for immediate debrief, while the scenario was reset for the class. "Next group. Talk me through your decision-making," she began, her tone professional but not harsh. "Kane, why did you split your element after Morrison went down?" Kane took a breath, organizing his thoughts. "Ma'am, I assessed that securing Morrison and completing the mission were both critical. Splitting the element allowed us to accomplish both objectives, and the risk of conducting building clearance with only 2 operators. Higher than optimal, ma'am, but acceptable given time pressure and mission priority." Maya nodded. "Reasonable assessment. In combat, you rarely have optimal conditions. Learning to balance competing priorities is essential." She turned to Brooks. "Walk me through your decision to fire on the civilian role player." Brooks struggled to meet her eyes. "Ma'am, I perceived a threat based on his movement toward his waistband. Training says engage threats before they can engage you. And what else does training say? Positive identification before engagement, ma'am." "Exactly. You made a split-second decision based on incomplete information. In some situations, that decision saves lives. In others, it creates strategic problems that undermine the entire mission. Maya's voice wasn't condemning, she was teaching. The question you need to ask yourself is, what could I have done differently to gain one more second of information before deciding to fire? Brooks considered. Better positioning. Ma'am. If I'd been at an angle where I could see his hands more clearly, I would have known he wasn't drawing a weapon. Correct. Positioning is tactical thinking. You weren't wrong to be ready to fire. You were wrong to put yourself in a position where you couldn't distinguish between threat and non-threat until it was too late. The debrief continued, Maya dissecting each decision point and showing the candidates how small choices accumulated into outcomes. She wasn't harsh, but she was thorough, forcing them to confront the gap between training, proficiency, and operational effectiveness. The second element performed slightly better, learning from watching Kane's team. The third element adapted even more, showing that candidates could improve rapidly when given clear feedback and opportunity to observe. By 1100 hours, all three elements had completed the scenario. Maya gathered the entire class for comprehensive after-action review. What you experience today is a simplified version of the complexity you'll face in actual operations. She began. Real combat is messier, faster, and more ambiguous than any training scenario can simulate. But the fundamental skills remain the same: tactical thinking, team coordination, and decision-making under pressure. She pulled up video footage captured during the scenarios, showing specific moments where candidates had made strong or weak decisions. Here, she pointed to a clip of one element conducting a textbook room clearance. You see effective coordination. Each operator knows their role. Communication is minimal but effective, and the team moves as a single unit. She advanced to another clip, showing an element becoming disorganized under stress. Here, you see breakdown. Individual operators making decisions without coordinating with teammates. It results in gaps in coverage, friendly fire risks, and mission compromise. The candidates watched themselves with the critical eyes of people seeing their performance objectively for the first time. The gap between these two clips isn't physical capability, it's mental discipline. Maya continued. The ability to maintain tactical thinking when your adrenaline is spiking and everything is happening faster than you can consciously process. She looked around the assembled candidates. That discipline doesn't come naturally. It comes from thousands of hours of practice until correct procedures become automatic. It comes from detailed after-action reviews where you honestly assess your mistakes. And it comes from humility, accepting that no matter how good you think you are, there's always room for improvement. Kane raised his hand. Ma'am, based on what you observed today, how prepared are we for actual combat operations? It was a brave question, asking for honest assessment rather than reassurance. Maya respected the courage it took to ask. Honestly, you're prepared to survive initial contact and execute basic procedures. You're not yet prepared to adapt when plans fail, make complex decisions under ambiguity, or lead teams through sustained operations. But you're at the right stage of development for where you are in training. She paused. What concerns me isn't your current capability level, it's whether you understand how much you still have to learn. The candidates who left Hell Week thinking they'd proven everything they needed to prove are the ones who'll struggle most when they reach teams and face operators with years of deployment experience. How do we bridge that gap? Morrison asked. By changing how you think about training. Stop viewing evolutions as tests to pass, and start viewing them as opportunities to develop capabilities you'll need in combat. Don't just execute procedures. Understand why those procedures exist, and when they might need to be modified. Learn from every mistake, every success, every moment of uncertainty. Maya walked to the center of the formation. You're training to become members of the most elite military force in the world. That excellence isn't achieved by being the strongest or fastest candidate. It's achieved by being the most thoughtful, most adaptable, most committed to continuous improvement. She met Kane's eyes, then Morrison's, then scanned the entire class. I've been where you are now. I remember thinking that completing training meant I was ready for anything. Then I deployed. And I learned how much I didn't know. The operators who saved my life and taught me how to be effective weren't the ones who'd been strongest in training. They were the ones who'd learned to think tactically and work as seamless members of a team. The classroom was absolutely silent, every candidate absorbing her words. "One final thing," Maya said. "Several of you have asked about my background, about how a woman could complete SEAL training when the program wasn't officially open to women. Here's the truth. I was part of a classified trial program designed to assess integration feasibility. I completed the same training you're completing now, with the same standards, the same evolutions, the same instructor team." She paused, letting that information settle. "I deployed with SEAL teams, conducted combat operations, and did everything male teammates did. Not because standards were lowered, but because I met the same standards they met. And I'm here now to help ensure that future integration is done correctly, maintaining operational excellence, while opening opportunities to capable candidates, regardless of." "Ma'am," Brooks asked quietly, "what was the hardest part? Of being the first? Of doing it when everyone doubted it was possible?" Maya considered the question seriously. "The hardest part wasn't the physical training. It wasn't proving I could meet standards. The hardest part was maintaining confidence in myself when surrounded by doubt from others. When instructors questioned whether I belonged, when teammates wondered if I'd be a liability, when every mistake was seen as evidence that women couldn't do the job." She smiled slightly. "But I had advantages, too. I had to be more thoughtful than male candidates because I knew I couldn't rely purely on physical strength. I had to be more tactical because I knew I'd be scrutinized more closely. And I had to be more committed to the team because I understood that my success or failure would impact opportunities for women who came after me." "And now?" Kane asked. "Now that integration is official, what advice would you give to female candidates attempting SEAL training?" "The same advice I'd give male candidates. Meet the standards. Work harder than you think possible. Learn from every experience. Stay humble. And understand that earning the Trident is just the beginning. The real work starts when you reach teams and have to prove yourself operationally." Lieutenant Commander Briggs stepped forward, signaling the conclusion of the assessment. "Class 342, you've participated in a unique evaluation that will inform how we train future SEAL candidates. Staff Sergeant Reeves will be compiling her assessment and providing recommendations to Naval Special Warfare Command. Your performance today, both your successes and your struggles, will help us improve the pipeline for everyone who follows you." He paused. "You should also know that what you've experienced over the past 2 days is a privilege few candidates receive. Having an operator with Staff Sergeant Reeves's experience observe your training and provide direct feedback is an opportunity most SEALs don't get until they've been in teams for years." "Hooyah, sir," the class responded. The traditional SEAL acknowledgement, carrying genuine appreciation rather than just ritual response. Dismissed to chow. We resume regular training schedule at 1,400 hours. As the formation dispersed, Kane's 12-man group approached Maya together, coming to attention before her. "Ma'am," Kane said formally, "we wanted to thank you for pushing us these past 2 days. We started by disrespecting you, and you responded by teaching us things we desperately needed to learn. We were arrogant," Morrison added. "We thought surviving Hell Week meant we'd already proven everything we needed to prove. You showed us we'd only proven we could suffer. We still need to learn how to think. And ma'am," Wilson continued, "we wanted to apologize specifically for the comments we made about your not understanding military culture or SEAL operations. You understand it better than we do. And you earned that understanding through harder service than we can yet imagine." Maya looked at the 12 young men standing before her, chastened but not broken, humbled but not defeated. They'd learned critical lessons over the past 2 days, lessons that would serve them throughout their careers. "Gentlemen, your apology is accepted, but I want you to understand something important." She met each of their eyes in turn. "You didn't fail by making mistakes. You didn't fail by being initially arrogant. Every SEAL who's ever worn the Trident started exactly where you are, young, confident, convinced they understood what this community was about. She paused. You succeeded by being willing to learn, by adapting when confronted with evidence that your assumptions were wrong, by having the courage to apologize when you recognized you'd been disrespectful. Those qualities, adaptability, humility, courage to acknowledge mistakes, those are what will make you effective operators. We won't forget these lessons, ma'am, Brooks said quietly. See that you don't. And when you graduate from training, when you reach teams and work with operators who've deployed multiple times, remember what you learned here. Stay humble. Keep learning. Never assume you've mastered everything. As they departed, Senior Chief Hammond approached Maya with a satisfied expression. That, he said simply, was exactly what they needed. We can teach them physical skills and basic tactics, but learning humility and tactical thinking from someone who's actually done the job? That's invaluable. They're good candidates, Maya replied. They'll be good operators if they continue developing the right mindset. Your assessment is going to recommend continuation of current standards for integration? Maya nodded. With some modifications to emphasize tactical thinking and team coordination earlier in the pipeline. But yes, the physical standards are operationally justified, and candidates who meet them regardless of gender should have the opportunity to serve. That's going to make some people happy and others very uncomfortable. The truth usually does. 2 weeks later, Maya stood in Lieutenant Commander Briggs's office, delivering her final briefing before departing Coronado. Your assessment has been forwarded to Naval Special Warfare Command with the highest possible endorsements, Briggs reported. The training modifications you recommended are already being incorporated into pipeline curriculum. Maya's report had been comprehensive: 73 pages of detailed observations, tactical analysis, and specific recommendations for improving how SEAL candidates were trained. The core conclusion: physical standards should remain unchanged, but tactical thinking and team coordination needed to be emphasized earlier and more consistently throughout training. What about the integration question? Maya asked. Your assessment provided the operational justification command needed. Female candidates who meet standards will continue through the pipeline without modification or special accommodation. Your existence proves it's possible. Your deployment record proves it's operationally effective. And Class 342? Briggs smiled. They're performing noticeably better since your evaluation. Kane's group in particular has become much more thoughtful in their approach to training. They're asking better questions, analyzing their performance more critically, and showing genuine team-oriented behavior rather than individual competition. Good. They have potential to be excellent operators if they continue developing the right mindset. Before you leave, there's one more thing. Briggs pulled out a folder containing a formal letter. Naval Special Warfare Command has requested that you consider returning to operational status. They're standing up a new training cell focused on integration support and advanced tactical instruction. They want you to lead it. Maya took the letter, reading through the formal language that translated to, "We need you back." "I'll consider it," she said carefully. "But I need to be certain I'm ready to return to that world. The reason I left wasn't injury, it was because I needed distance from operational tempo and combat stress." "Understood. Take the time you need to decide. The offer will remain open." As Maya prepared to leave Coronado, she made one final stop at the training compound. Class 342 was conducting pool drills, working through underwater equipment recovery exercises with the methodical precision of candidates who'd learned to value process over speed. She watched from a distance, not announcing her presence. Kane's group worked together with noticeably improved coordination, communicating effectively and supporting each other through challenging evolutions. They'd internalized the lessons about team over individual performance. Morrison surfaced from a particularly difficult drill, saw Maya at the pool's edge, and swam over. "Ma'am, we didn't know you were still on base. Just leaving today." wanted to see how training was progressing. The rest of his group surfaced and gathered at the pool edge, treading water while they talked. "We've been applying everything you taught us," Wilson reported, "analyzing every evolution, asking ourselves tactical questions, instead of just executing procedures. And it's working," Brooks added. "Our performance scores have improved across the board. More importantly, we're actually understanding why we're doing things instead of just doing them." Kane pulled himself out of the pool, water streaming from his wetsuit. "Ma'am, before you leave, we wanted to give you something." He retrieved a small package from his gear bag and handed it to Maya. Inside was a challenge coin custom designed with the Class 342 insignia on one side and an inscription on the other. "Real warriors serve. Rank is just letters. Class 342. To S. Sergeant Reeves. With respect and gratitude." Maya held the coin, recognizing the significance. Challenge coins were a military tradition, tokens of respect and belonging given to acknowledge shared experience and mutual regard. "Thank you, gentlemen. I'll carry this with me. We wanted you to know," Kane said seriously, "that you changed how we think about being SEALs. We came into this program thinking it was about being the strongest, the fastest, the toughest. You taught us it's about being the smartest, the most adaptable, the most committed to the team. Those lessons will serve you well when you deploy," Maya replied. "Remember them when you face situations where there's no clear right answer, where you have to make decisions with incomplete information and live with the consequences." "We will, ma'am." As Maya walked away from the pool, heading toward the base exit, she reflected on the past 2 weeks. She'd come to Coronado expecting to conduct a Reservian Aboutsang, straightforward assessment of training methodologies. Instead, she'd been forced to confront her own relationship with the SEAL community and her identity as one of the first women to earn the Trident. The candidates she'd evaluated would likely never know the full extent of her operational background, the missions that remained classified, the close calls that had almost ended her career, the teammates she'd lost to combat. But they'd learned the essential lessons: humility, tactical thinking, and team before self. That was enough. Her phone buzzed with a secure message from Naval Special Warfare Command. It contained deployment orders for the new training cell, along with a note: "When you're ready, we'll be waiting. Your country needs your expertise. Your community needs your leadership. No pressure, but we really need you." Maya smiled at the informal tone in an official message. The SEAL community had always balanced rigid professionalism with tight-knit camaraderie. It was one of the things she'd missed most during her time away. She typed a response: "I'll give you my answer in 30 days. But I'm seriously considering it." As she drove away from Naval Base Coronado, Maya thought about the future. About the female candidates currently in training who would benefit from improved pipeline methodology. About the male candidates who would learn to value tactical thinking alongside physical prowess. About the SEAL teams that would be strengthened by integration done correctly. And about her own role in that future, whether she was ready to return to operational service, to put the uniform back on and resume the work that had defined her adult life. The ocean stretched to the horizon, endless and beautiful and utterly indifferent to human ambition. But somewhere out there, American forces were operating in hostile territory, depending on training and equipment and teammates to keep them alive. Maya had been one of those operators. She might be again. For now, she carried with her the satisfaction of knowing she'd made a difference. 12 arrogant young warriors had learned humility. A training pipeline had been improved. A path had been cleared for future generations of operators regardless of gender. Real warriors serve. Rank is just letters. The challenge coin rested in her pocket, a reminder of lessons taught and learned, of connections forged through shared commitment to something larger than individual achievement. The story ends here, but the journey continues. Many new adventures are waiting for you. And if you enjoyed, please take a moment to like, subscribe to our e-story channel, and turn on the bell. See you in the next story.